When we're introduced to Thor and Loki together, they're simply children listening to a story from their father. They all hold hands because what binds them together is a shared narrative of inheritance. As a result, the brotherly relationship of Thor and Loki is built on an exploration about the meaning we make from assigned heritage statuses.
As king of Asgard. But you're not king!
One brother is preoccupied by nostalgia for war and glory, and the other is trapped in a paradox where the only way to become who he wants to be is to forsake his desire for it.
It is my birthright. Your birthright was to die!
Both have the capacity to become king, and both eventually do, but they also both end up doing a bad job of it, because as much as they are entitled for great power, they need to find separate meanings for themselves. Therefore, the purpose of this essay is to compare Loki and Thor's journeys in order to understand how the theme of heritage develops. Which means I'm going to reiterate some points from their single character essays and ramble some more about identity. So you know, it's the usual stuff I do.
It's the end of the future, I'm not a witch.
No? Then why'd you dress like one?
Now they're firing at us!
Yeah, thank you for the commentary, Loki. It's not at all distracting. Listen well, brother.
I'm listening.
The structures that surround us are what produces the way we sense time. Pre-modern feudal societies tend to produce deeply repetitive ways of understanding life because everything is built on different cyclical rhythms. Like serfs would shape their sense of time with the direction of seasons for farming purposes. While for royalty and kings, there's an obsession with reproduction because their idea of the future is deeply related to who gets to inherit what position. Subsequently, the first act of Thor and Loki's relationship is built on a criticism of this structure.
Only one of you can ascend to the throne, but both of you were born to be kings.
Because regret is the defining theme that starts both characters' journeys. Thor's overwhelming desire to be a great conquering king is what initially causes him to be punished, while Loki's ambition to circumvent his brother is what leads him to discover he's a frost giant. Therefore, the throne is the secret villain because their competing heritage towards it is the very thing that bends their identities. They don't recognize themselves as individuals but as symbolic subjects.
My first command cannot be to undo the All-Father's last.
But Thor is the hero because he's the first one to break this cycle, because by falling in love with Jane he develops an identity outside of his inherited status, whereas Loki is actively regressing to the extent that the big explosive confession in the climax are the words,
I will not fight you, brother!
I'm not your brother. I never was.
Loki tries to rewrite his own memories so he doesn't continue to lose more. As a result, it makes sense that within Thor's introduction in Avengers 1, he presents a different past, one framed by the theme of togetherness.
We played together, we fought together. Do you remember none of that?
I remember a shadow, living in the shade of your greatness. I remember you tossing me into an abyss, I who was and should be king.
Which on one hand works as very clearly exposition for people who hadn't seen Thor 1, but it also develops the theme of regret by moving it into the stage of reconciliation.
Loki is beyond reason, but he is of Asgard, and he is my brother.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
There's now two competing narratives between Thor and Loki. As much as they can't help but to bicker with each other as brothers, they also fight each other as kings, to the extent that almost all of their dialogue scenes are built around one character trying to validate their perspective in the other person's eye.
It's too late to stop it.
No, we can together.
Consequently, these two films fit together to tell a story about time, where the regressive desire to become king is the key underpinning enemy for both characters. Loki shouts, "I only wanted to be your equal" in Thor 1, and that's his motive in The Avengers.
I was a king. The rightful king of Asgard.
He's a character orientated backwards to the point that his capacity to imagine a future is actively limited by his obsession with his cultural heritage. But Thor is able to be free because he simply doesn't care about what he's entitled to anymore.
I'd rather be a good man than a great king.
He's only interested in the man that he can develop into. He's free. Dark World expands upon everything by having Loki and Thor alienated by their connection with Asgard. Loki progresses his self-identification as a villain to the point that where he previously wanted to impress his father, he now rewrites his own past to remove him and everyone else.
Your father.
He's not my father!
Then am I not your mother?
You're not.
While Thor's romantic love for a future with Jane and a life outside of Asgard furthers his disinterest in becoming king. They've both developed effectively unrecognizable motivations because of how their sense of time has changed their self-identity.
Nothing out of order except your confused and distracted heart.
But then the death of their mother Frigga shakes both men and gives them a temporal stabilizing agent, if you will, to become brothers again.
You betray me, and I will kill you.
When do we start?
Loki and Thor, despite being horrible enemies, they're now obliged to love each other because it's the only way for them to celebrate the memory of their mother.
She wouldn't want us to fight.
Well, she wouldn't exactly be shocked.
In death, she allows them to share a past and thus have shared materials to imagine a future that unavoidably includes each other, something that Loki makes a point of in his play. Thor Ragnarok may seem aesthetically divorced from the rest of the Thor films because it's so tonally different, but it actually pays off an incredible amount of themes from before. Thor is now a fun-loving adventurer who's consciously enjoying his identity as a hero.
That's what heroes do.
While Loki has sneakily become king with big, elaborate plays celebrating his own name. This effectively is the ultimate destination that both characters were heading towards the moment we saw them as children.
I'll hunt the monsters down and slay them all.
Thor was a cavalier child filled with a brave sense of bravado, while as a kid Loki was more self-conscious and interested with home than the new frontier.
We'll have to defend that peace.
Do the frost giants still live?
And now both characters have conquered their respective worlds. So when Odin dies, they sit with him as the same boys as they always were. The story has come full circle. But then Hela appears, and now both Thor and Loki are forced to change because she takes away Asgard. Subsequently, Sakaar thematically materializes the halfway point of Loki and Thor's arcs.
Hurts, doesn't it? Being lied to. Being told you one thing and learning it's all a fiction.
You faked your own death. You stole the throne, stripped Odin of his power, stranded him on Earth to die, releasing the goddess of death. I said enough. Would you like me to go back further than the past 2 days?
Loki's life is now about redemption, and the Grandmaster is who Loki will become if he fails, while Thor's journey is focused on perseverance.
Lost my father! I lost my hammer!
If he loses hope, then he'll end up like Valkyrie. And thirdly, Hulk gives to them a connection with the past. He's a comrade of Thor's and is a reminder of Loki's previous sins.
He's up there! Loki! Look who it is!
But the big turning point doesn't involve any of these characters, instead simply involves a quiet moment in an elevator, where once again Thor gives Loki an alternate viewpoint of the past.
Loki, I thought the world of you. I thought we were going to fight side by side forever, but at the end of the day, you're you and I'm me. Let's be honest, our paths diverged a long time ago.
One where Loki isn't the boy who was left behind, but the person that Thor was trying to keep up with because he knew Loki would always be there. This is a moment of sheer brotherly love, where Thor's the only person left in the whole galaxy that knows Loki well enough that these words would work like a form of reverse psychology.
It's probably for the best that we never see each other again.
That's what you always wanted. Dear brother, becoming predictable. I trust you. You betray me round and round in circles we go. See, Loki, life is about growth. It's about change. But you seem to just want to stay the same. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you'll always be the god of mischief. But you could be more.
He knows Loki will come back, while Loki gets the words that he didn't know but always wanted to hear. That he was simply looking at the past all wrong. Therefore, Loki chooses to become a rescuer after his last effort at being evil fails, because without Thor, there's nothing else to do but be a good man, and recognize the value he could negotiate from his cultural identity, something he's unconsciously been doing this whole time, which is why he declares himself as
I am Loki of Asgard.
And why he has statues of himself, and why when he reappears he screams,
Your savior is here!
Thor is able to save the people of Asgard because by having learned to let go of his old desires, he's able to let go of the physical place of Asgard. He can accept value beyond the material. Both men are now free.
You know, maybe you're not so bad after all, brother.
Maybe not.
Thank you.
The sun will shine on us again.
Loki and Thor's journey is ultimately about the impact of shared narratives. Their heritage gave them context for understanding who they are, but it also trapped them in a cyclical way of thinking. Therefore, all of these journeys fit together to tell one big story about escaping this cycle. Loki didn't want to be who he was, and Thor wanted to be someone else.
Loki, for all his grave imbalance, understood rulers I know I never will.
Heritage isolated these brothers into a life of perpetual judgment from the past. Therefore, their final moments in the Infinity Saga is characterized by them finally breaking the thing that isolated them.
I, Loki, Prince of Asgard, Odin's son.
Loki finally embraces being an Odin's son. So when he dies, it's both a punishment for his previous actions, but also a celebration of his new life. One with convictions. Thor finally becomes free by not only leaving his position as king, but in also giving it to Valkyrie based on her merits.
But you're a leader. That's who you are.
You know, I'd make a lot of changes around here.
I'm counting on it. Your Majesty.
He breaks the cycle by turning it into a ladder, as now the burden of the throne is not based on those who inherit it, but those that work for it. Heritage is a process of which people use the past. As Smith said, it's a discursive construction with material consequences, which in other words, heritage starts as words and with what's in our minds, then affects the physical world through us because they frame our minds and shape the boundaries of who we are and who we can become. Thor and Loki's love for each other is the very thing that breaks through the frame, because by accepting their identities as brothers, they're no longer trapped by the boundaries of being king.
I wouldn't worry, brother. I feel like everything's gonna work out fine.
Thor and Loki are a fun pair because they have such an incredibly wide spectrum of tonal experiences. We see them through the lens of a Shakespearean drama with Kenneth Branagh, then as a grim and serious fantasy with Alan Taylor, then through a self-aware and subversive tone with Joss Whedon and Taika Waititi, and finally then a fun mixture of all of these aesthetics with the Russo brothers. Whatever happens with Loki and his show, or Thor and Love and Thunder, their journey in the Infinity Saga mapped out their limits. Underneath a dude who wore horns was a kid escaping the identity he was born with, whereas the boy who had wings on his helmet was always gliding away from home, searching for a new one. Despite all the fighting, clashes and battles in different genres, the most important thing they inherited as the sons of Odin, ironically, was each other. Yeah, you knew I was going to say that, right?